It is September 1st, 2011. Thank you for joining us for the maiden voyage of InfoWars Nightly News. We're going to be here Monday through Friday for at least 30 minutes every night, covering the most important news and information at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Coming up this evening, we're going to examine the evidence. Is America completely dominated, controlled, and conquered by the offshore criminal banksters? Ron Paul will be joining us to comment. Then we'll talk to journalist Webster Griffin Tarpley, who recently traveled back from Libya while it was under bombardment. He'll give us his take on the unfolding humanitarian disaster there now and the fact that Gaddafi has pledged that he will not surrender. Then the embattled CEO of American icon Gibson Guitars, who's been raided now by 2 different federal SWAT team raids for simply manufacturing here inside the United States, will join us. But first, let's get to some of the other important headlines and analysis. Yesterday, InfoWars.com reported on, and it was picked up by the Drudge Report and other national news institutions, that a man in Illinois, who has no criminal record and 41 years of age, mechanic Michael Allison, who filmed police in public, was charged. The police and prosecutors are seeking life in prison, or at least 75 years. It's interesting to note that on the same day, the 31st of August, Federal Appeals Court, the level right below the Supreme Court, the First Circuit Court of the United States, ruled that, of course, you can film the police in public and it's not wiretapping. There is no perception of privacy for police, citizens, movie stars, or anybody else. And the fact that we now have 12 separate states that are prosecuting people for filming police at city council meetings, on the streets, you name it, is very frightening, because the police and prosecutors know this is not illegal and are seeking to push a chilling effect against the First Amendment and the right of the citizens to have a fair witness via the camera and audio tape. Remember, dozens and dozens of state and federal courts have already thrown this out before. Still, the police are arresting people knowing that it's false imprisonment and a fraud. This indeed is a serious signpost and marker showing us that we are deep inside the police state. But there is some hope, because the courts are universally ruling against this, but only at the appeal level. Local courts are fully endorsing it and throwing the book at citizens. We'll look at this in more depth later with Webster Tarpley, historian and economist who's recently been in Libya under bombardment. But first, let's get a little bit into Muammar Gaddafi. He has vowed in new audio tapes released and played via Syria, broadcast from Syria, that he will never surrender. And as Colonel Anthony Schaefer of U.S. Army Special Forces predicted, as Webster Tarpley and as myself and others predicted, as Ron Paul predicted, Libya is now descending into a giant tribal civil war. Our media, the dinosaur media, claimed that this was all being done to avert a humanitarian disaster, when in truth, the West funded and financed the rebels from the beginning and used it as a pretext to invade the country. Suddenly, CNN saying, hey, looks like the war isn't over yet. Not quite yet. And they're replacing Gaddafi with al-Qaeda if they are successful. Now, every few days, the rebels claim they have Gaddafi cornered, or that he's already been killed, or that all his sons have been killed. We've been lied to over and over again. But now they're saying that they're giving him 1 more week to surrender, or that they will have them. Finally, Reuters is reporting that they believe the ousted Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi, is believed to be in the desert town of Bani Walid, about 150 miles southeast of Tripoli, a top commander of Libya's National Transitional Council said today. Continuing with the news, we saw hundreds of billions of dollars of stimulus money pumped into Democratic donors' coffers. And in almost every one of these make-work projects, especially with green jobs, the money just disappeared. And we've gotten a new example of that today. White House-backed solar energy company collapses after getting $500 million of taxpayer money. And, of course, there's not going to be an investigation for where all of that money has gone. Continuing to look at the federal power grab via the executive that is taking place, Jay Carney, the White House press secretary, today, in a speech, said, well, the president will move ahead with a bunch of different policies outside of Congress if Congress doesn't basically do what the president wants. And what's so scary about this is we now have a super Congress that is originating spending bills. That's never happened in our 230-plus year history. And the president has veto power over that. We also have Obama launching wars and telling Congress he doesn't need their authority. We have Obama shutting down selective power plants, telling Congress he doesn't need laws. The ATF announcing new gun regulations outside of law. We are clearly seeing the executive more and more turn into a dictatorial position. Now, I'm not saying Obama himself is a dictator. He's a puppet, a teleprompter reader who's fed the scripts by the social engineers and the special interests. That's on record. He won't even speak to a group of school kids without a teleprompter. Most media in this country is off a script or with a teleprompter. When I talk about the presidency being turned into a dictatorial position, I'm talking about the executive branch that is basically in control of the giant unelected bureaucracy. And an example of that is Democrats distancing themselves from Obama. This out of the National Journal. People think this is a victory. They're just going to put a new puppet in, and when the public wakes up to that puppet, they'll put another puppet in. I should add here, swivel that document cam up over there, we do not have a teleprompter. Local news in the smallest town has it. Most talk radio goes off a script. The only televisions that we have in here are so that I can see the guest that I'm talking to and the video clips that we're playing so I can comment on it. This is the only teleprompter-free news that we know of in the United States and most of the world. So you're going to hear me make mistakes. You're going to hear me sometimes stumble on a word. You're going to hear me pause while they're playing a news package because it's real. Why are teleprompters so dangerous? It allows talking points to be written by centralized committees, by special interest and others, and then to be fed out. Have you ever noticed that if you watch ABC, CBS, NBC, it is the same news in the same order, even in many cases the same sponsors? That's because all of those stations run their news out of the CBS Broadcast Center in Manhattan. So I'm here showing you what's behind the curtain, ladies and gentlemen, and bringing you real news, real analysis, and it's up to you to research this information and to make your own decision. Now, continuing with really freaky and creepy news, FEMA's use of term federal family for government expands under Obama. They started this term a few years ago, but now in thousands of government documents, the Palm Beach Post reports, they're telling feds, you're in a family. And it's basically the feds against the rest of us. No kidding. We'll be talking about that with the CEO of Gibson, who was raided later. Continuing with the final piece of news, gasoline closed to a record high before the Labor Day weekend. What's the main cause of that? Gold hasn't gone up in price. Silver hasn't really gone up in price. Oil and food hasn't gone up in price. What's gone up in price is all the commodities because the dollar has been devalued. You devalue currencies, you become like Argentina, Zimbabwe, Weimar Republic, Germany, where it takes a wheelbarrow of money at the end to buy a loaf of bread. Next, I want to get to a compilation of video clips from the last few years where we see Alan Greenspan on Lair NewsHour say Congress has no authority over the private Federal Reserve who controls our currency and our credit. Remember, in the Constitution, the Congress is supposed to control that. Now, the president's taken the power of war-making away. It's all part of the centralization that Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Julius Caesar 2,000 plus years ago, engaged in. Next, we get to another Alan Greenspan clip from a few weeks ago where he told the show Meet the Prostitutes, Meet the Press, that the Fed isn't worried about defaulting on T-bills that people have bought because they'll just print money. And they've got Austin Goolsbee, the skull and bones are on there, who works for Obama, kind of freaks out that he would say this publicly because that's another form of default to hyperinflate the currency, and it destroys people on fixed incomes and destroys savings. Then we're going to go to a clip of Bernanke arguing with Ron Paul in the banking committee, saying gold is not money. And then we expand from there, where Congress is asking Bernanke, where is the money? Where are the hundreds of billions and trillions? And he says, no, I won't tell you. So gold isn't money, and they won't tell you where all the taxpayer backed up fiat debt notes have gone. And then finally, we're going to play a clip of the former Treasury Secretary. They're all working as a team, the last two administrations. Henry Paulson being asked where all these hundreds of millions of dollars went that he gave himself. How do you give yourself, the former head of Goldman Sachs, this money? He can barely talk. He's all breaking up as somebody's asking him a real question, and he goes on to basically say he gave himself a waiver through the White House. So here is this incredible compilation, and I ask you the question, will America allow itself to be fully bankrupt and dominated and conquered by these criminal banksters?
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. So long as that is in place and there is no evidence that the administration or the Congress or anybody else is requesting that we do things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are don't frankly matter. And I've had very good relationships with presidents.
Are U.S. Treasury bonds still safe to invest in?
Very much so. I think this is not an issue of credit rating. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default.
The reason the Federal Reserve was founded a century ago was to try to address the problems arising from financial panics, which did, by the way, occur in an unregulated environment in the 19th century. We provided liquidity and short-term loans to help financial systems stabilize. We did that not because we particularly care about the managers.
You say it's not spending money. Well, it's money out of thin air. You put it into the market and you hold assets, and the assets aren't, they are diminishing in value. When you wake up in the morning, do you care about the price of gold?
Well, I pay attention to the price of gold, but I think it reflects a lot of things. It reflects global uncertainties. I think the reason people hold gold is as a protection against what we call tail risk, really, really bad outcomes. And to the extent that the last few years have made people more worried about the potential of a major crisis, then they have gold as a protection.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
It's not money. Even if it had been money for 6,000 years, somebody reversed that and eliminated that economic law.
Well, it's an asset. I mean, it's the same. Would you say Treasury bills are money? I don't think they're money either, but they're a financial asset.
Why do central banks hold it?
Well, it's a form of reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition.
So my question to you is, will you tell the American people to whom you lent $2.2 trillion of their dollars, will you tell us who got that money and what the terms are of those agreements?
We explain each of our programs. In terms of the terms, we explain the terms exactly. We explain what the collateral requirements are. We explain what.
To whom did you explain that?
It's on our website.
Yeah. Okay.
So all that information is available in our commercial paper program.
And who got the money?
Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Will you tell us who they are?
No, because the reason that is counterproductive and will destroy the value of the program is that banks will not come to the business.
Well, isn't that too bad?
I left Goldman Sachs. I sold my shares in Goldman Sachs.
Tax deferred, too. You didn't have to pay any tax on your $200 million.
I sold my shares in Goldman Sachs.
The clause that if you come into the administration, you sell your assets, it's tax deferred. You don't have to pay $200. If you had $200 million profit and you didn't have